Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Last month, we were subjected to the disgusting spectacle of the Florida bunny ruckus Jacoby Pittman, who defended Ron DeSantis after he helped to encourage and inspire a mass murder of black Floridians. We don't have a leadership class in Black America. What we've got is a turncoat class, because they've literally been bought and paid for by white power. People who we don't know and didn't choose and who have nothing but contempt for us. We always have these clowns who seemingly drop out of nowhere, and when they pop up on the scene, they instantly have favorable white media coverage. They get news stories talking about how great they are, their background, etc. It's obvious the white media is bigging them up and trying to push them on us hard. People we don't know who are crowned leaders of the black community, and who's crowning them? The white media. And notice how none of these people ever says, hey, I'm not the leader of the black community, I'm not the leader of anything. No. When the white media heaps praise on them, they are only too eager to say, yep, that's me, leader, and here's where I'm leading, folks. This is what y'all need to be following. No, they understand that they're tools of white supremacy, and they lean into that role heavy. They have their hands out all the time looking for money from white power, be it money from the government, or companies, or private individuals. They're political prostitutes, except they're not just selling themselves. They're also trying to whore out the black community, too. The mission of the black grassroots is to ensure that we have the resources we require to defend our present and to ensure our future. The mission of the traitor class is to make sure that never happens. These traitors are kamikazes. They don't care if their stupidity leads to their own deaths. Karen Bass isn't thinking about anything other than Karen Bass. Officer Eric Adams, Mayor Eric Adams of New York, same thing. Bunny Ruckus, Jacoby Pittman, that is, same thing. White power makes it a point to look for and carefully select these kinds of self-destructive bootlicks, cretins who won't protect themselves and don't care what happens tomorrow. Can you imagine the effect of having one such person in a position to represent the black community? Now, can you imagine if your entire political class was riddled and infested with people like this? That's what we're up against. Years ago, I told you about a documentary from Al Jazeera called The Lobby USA. It dealt specifically with the Israeli government and how they lobby for laws to benefit the Israeli government, but mostly how the Israeli government uses millions and millions of dollars, much of it coming from the U.S., to silence anyone who disagrees with them on their policies. The Israeli government and their friends in private industry fund entire constellations of organizations dedicated to that goal. One of these groups had a meeting which was secretly recorded, and an Israeli government official said this.
The major problem of Israel is with the young generation of the black community. Black Lives Matter starts there. I had last week a sit-down dinner at my house for 40 people, which are considered the leadership of the black community, and it's very important people. They can be part of our doing an activity.
Did you get that? Private dinners with people who they consider to be our leaders. Well, who said that they were our leaders? The white media, which doesn't actually report the views of black people. They instead try to dictate our views to us, tell us lies and repeat them endlessly and see if we eventually start falling for it. A lot of black people do, but as this Israeli diplomat said, the younger black people are not falling for it, and that's a problem. As she put it, the biggest problem they face. Now, black people, certainly young black people, have never declared themselves enemies of Israel, so why is this woman talking like this? Black people in general don't think about Israel at all, certainly not in a hostile way. Yet she's declaring that black people are the enemy and that she has some black folks on the payroll who can be part of their doings and activities. Their doings and activities for what? She doesn't say. She also doesn't ask, how can we befriend the black community? How can we help them to get what they need to show our goodwill? How can we use our influence and resources to help the black community to achieve its objectives? You see, that approach is common sense. And she knows this. Instead, all she's talking about is how these bootlick pals of hers can be made of use. This is someone who's giving a blueprint for manipulation, not friendship, and she gave the game away. Now, you'll notice she said she had these sellouts at her house for dinner. Well, as I've been telling you for years now, when it comes to these bootlicks, they'll sell us out for a home-cooked meal. It sounds ridiculous, and it is, but it's also the truth. The bootlick has no shame and no brains. Things that are patently ridiculous to you and me come naturally to them. And for them to be so easily bought off with a plate of food shows that the plantation mentality is alive and well among the same traitor class who worked to undermine every slave revolt we ever staged. All these so-called black activist organizations are nothing more than social clubs. They get together, shuck and jive, and eat a few plates of food, then go home and do nothing. It is not some victimless crime when these professional do-nothing organizations have their NAACP spring breakfast, followed by the National Action League summer brunch, followed by the Urban League fall fish fry. These are literally plantation politics. It's the pork barrel all over again. They treat black people like a bunch of slaves, and too many of us play along with it. We have people who brag that they have set up puppets within our community whose job is to tell us that they'll represent our interest, and then the second that they're out of sight, it's off to the cookout. As the black community, we're supposed to be asking who was at these closed-door meetings this woman was talking about. What were they talking about, and what were they doing against us? Now that brings me to the latest update on how white power is bragging about how they have these puppets on strings, and how these sellouts are so suicidal they'll sit on their hands while it happens. AIPAC, the powerful pro-Israel lobbying group, has been mounting an effort to go after members of the Congressional Black Caucus. And why is that? Because some of them apparently haven't been towing the line as much as AIPAC wants. The problem isn't that they haven't been obeying, the problem is they haven't been sufficiently subservient while they do it. According to The Intercept, the only incumbent politicians AIPAC has been targeting this year are all CBC members. In Pennsylvania, AIPAC tried to recruit a black candidate to run against Representative Summer Lee. That would-be challenger, Lindsey Powell, declined AIPAC's offer. So did a white candidate that they tried to recruit, Corey O'Connor. Eventually, there was an Indian candidate, Bhavini Patel, who has allegedly accepted AIPAC's offer, and yes, this Patel woman is a Democrat. CBC members regularly attend lavish so-called vacations that AIPAC sponsors, where these political pimps go to Israel for an all-expenses-paid trip where they get wined and dined and are told how much they will benefit personally if they just go along with what these representatives of the Israeli government and their supporters in the U.S. say that they want done. Hakeem Jeffries, who is the minority leader in the House, wants to become Speaker, which would make him the first non-white person to hold that position. Problem for him is that he won't be able to get it without AIPAC's help, or at least those who are adjacent to it. AIPAC has always been right-leaning, but more than a few Democrats have bent the knee. Some thought that if they just didn't make any noise, then that they would be all right and wouldn't fall in their crosshairs. But of course it never works out that way. AIPAC's gunning for black Democrats who they can knock off, and the Congressional Black Caucus's leadership is sitting on their hands. The biggest reason is that this is a struggle between the old Negroes in Congress, who learned how to prostitute themselves for campaign cash, and as they see it, their only priority is to hold on to office because that's the only way that they can eat, and the only way that their kids get any money either. But it's also a struggle between younger folks who are coming in who apparently weren't getting taken care of so well. When you dance with the devil doesn't change. What's really interesting is that AIPAC's targeting these CBC members because they express support for the Palestinians. Or at the very least, they dared to say that Israel's being a bit rough on them. Now, wouldn't it be nice if any of them was making noise for black people and reparations? See, even the Negroes who white power claims to have an issue with are still playing the game. Everyone knows the third rail of American politics, and it's not Palestine. It's black empowerment. Well, these so-called progressive CBC members tried to play it safe, and they still got put in the crosshairs anyway. It's like I've always told you, bootlicking is a career path that doesn't come with a retirement plan. And they'll never put their own empty heads together against this anti-black racist initiative because they themselves are untrustworthy. They're trifling and treacherous. They know how conniving they are, and they know their fellow bootlicks are just as dirty. And since they depend on white power for every crumb of their daily bread, then of course they're not going to lift a finger for one another. They lack the will or the resources to protect themselves. They're publicly elected slaves, and the worst part is, they chose to be so. Alright, so that's the problem. What might be the solution? Ultimately, the black grassroots have to get their hands on the levers of power, because they should be in our hands. But before we go reaching for those levers, we have to make sure we're rock solid committed to our goals. White power loves to do gut checks on us, to hit us every once in a while and see how we react. Too many of us run the second that we encounter any resistance. Our focus must be to change that. For those of you who may wonder, when it comes to a political campaign, you need to start at least 4 years out from the campaign as far as planning goes. The first 2 years of activity is supposed to be devoted to canvassing and getting your monetary support infrastructure in place. Notice the wording that I used. The point is to perform your due diligence. Find out exactly how many eligible voters there are in the district that you want to run in, and then find out how many votes the incumbent that you want to run against got and how much you need to knock them off. Also, check into campaign finance records. Find out how much money your opponent was able to raise. That'll give you some idea of the ballpark you need to be reaching for. Most of these politicians who are in office, they didn't get there with millions and millions of dollars. Many of them simply got there because nobody dared to challenge them. People gave up on the process. They dropped out of the voting scene. And that creates an opportunity. 2 years out from the election is when you begin actually campaigning. If you wait until 6 months before the election, which is what a lot of people do, then you're dead in the water. Too many black people wait until election day itself, and by then you become just another also-ran. People need to learn your name and what you're going to do if elected, and that takes time. It will also take time to reach enough people so you can overcome whatever the existing local political structure is. The bad guys aren't going to just lay down and admit defeat. They'll use their little old machine to try to fight you. That's the bad news. The good news is they can be overcome if you make preparations. Now, the most difficult part is aggregating resources. AIPAC can easily go to white donors because white power gave them all the wealth. Where black people are concerned, it's a lot more difficult. This is where the first 2 years come into play. If you want votes, you have to make the case. If you want money, same thing. At some point, we will have to begin pushing back in the political arena because right now, the CBC is not the only group of old Negroes facing opposition. But this new black insurgency requires power on all levels. We have to be laser focused on that, because if we are, then we'll not only cut the puppet strings, we'll also break the ones pulling the strings too. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Alice Ransom, Isaac, David Green, Jasmine B., and Dondi Waddell. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.